Imagine a figure from ancient Greece, living maybe 2,500 years ago, but whose ideas, well, they sound really quite modern.
Yeah.
A pioneer who sort of laid the groundwork for neuroscience, psychology, even medicine as we know it.
That's right.
This deep dive, it's all about uncovering this phantom of the archives, Alcmaeon of Croton.
Exactly. And you shared some, well, really fascinating sources. They paint this picture of Alcmaeon as a philosopher-physician right there at the dawn of Western science. So today our mission, if you like, is to unpack his world, understand his frankly, groundbreaking ideas, trace his influence.
And figure out why people call him the father of neuroscience, right? Even though reconstructing his thought is, well...
tricky.
Very tricky. But yeah, that's the goal.
Okay, so let's set the scene. We need to transport you, our listener, back to Croton, a really vibrant city in Magna Graecia, that's southern Italy, now in the 5th century BCE.
Right. This place was famous for its athletes, like Milo, the legendary wrestler.
Six-time Olympic champion. Incredible. But... crucially for us, it was famous for its medical school. Herodotus himself said they had the best physicians in the Greek world.
Wow.
So it was this real crucible of thought. And the political stuff happening there actually directly inspired scientific breakthroughs. It's fascinating.
Okay, let's dig into that. Croton's influence.
Yeah, you really have to start with Croton itself to get Alcmaeon. So the city becomes super prominent after beating its rival, Sybaris. Big military victory.
When was that?
Around 510 BCE, right about when Alcmaeon would have been born, actually. And that victory made Croton the dominant power there, the hegemon.
And it wasn't just military power, as you said. That medical school, it really emphasized a scientific approach, didn't it? More empirical.
That's the key, a systematic approach to the body. So whether Alcmaeon was, a hands-on doctor or more of a natural philosopher, he was definitely in this environment that valued looking closely at things.
And the politics, you mentioned that shaped his ideas. How so?
Oh, deeply. The city's politics were, well, volatile. He had this mix of aristocratic rule, oligarchy, but also these growing democratic pressures.
Right.
So there was this constant tension, this clash between the rule of the few, or maybe just one person, oligarchia or monarchia, and this ideal of isonomia.
Isonomia, equality before the law.
Exactly. And that's the amazing link.
So Alcmaeon takes this political idea, isonomia, and applies it. Where?
To the body.
Directly to the human body. It's brilliant, really.
How revolutionary was that? I mean, connecting politics and physiology.
Oh, profoundly. It wasn't just like a neat metaphor. He saw it as reflecting the reality of life in the polis, in the city-state.
Yeah.
Think about it. If one faction, one person takes over the state monarchia, tyranny leads to chaos, right? Civic strife.
Makes sense.
Well, he says the same thing happens in the body.
Yeah.
If one quality, say too much heat or too much cold, becomes dominant, becomes a monarchia, that's disease.
So health is the balance, the isonomia. Health is the isonomia. The equal rule of opposing powers, hot, cold, wet, dry, bitter, sweet, all the rest. A dynamic equilibrium, just like a well-run state.
That's incredible. It really shows how early science wasn't just off in a lab somewhere. It was tied right into politics, society.
Like absolutely embedded. Yeah.
Now, you can't talk about Croton's intellectual scene without mentioning Pythagoras. Huge figure. His community was there, right? Around 530 BCE.
That's right. A very powerful presence. And they generally lined up with the aristocratic side of things.
So what was Alcmaeon's connection? Was he a Pythagorean? A student? A rival?
That's one of the big questions. The evidence is tantalizing, but you can't really pin it down.
Okay. What evidence do we have?
Well, later writers, the doxographers like Diogenes Laertius, they call him a pupil, but that might be, reading things backwards.
Right. Imposing later structures.
Exactly. More compelling is Aristotle. Much more reliable. He says Alcmaeon was young when Pythagoras was old, and that his system was pretty much like theirs.
Pretty much like theirs. And didn't Alcmaeon dedicate his book?
Yes. His only book on nature was addressed to 3 guys, Brotanus, Leon, Bathyllus, who are identified as Pythagoreans.
So that sounds pretty close.
Yeah.
Plus, his whole balance of opposites idea. That sounds Pythagorean too, doesn't it? Like the table of opposites.
It does sound similar structurally, but you have to be careful.
Why is that?
Well, those later accounts, like Diogenes, are often unreliable. And even Aristotle, he wasn't sure. He actually says he doesn't know if Alcmaeon borrowed from them or if they borrowed from him.
Ah, so maybe parallel thinking, not direct influence.
Could be, or influence going the other way. And then there are the really big differences in their actual ideas.
Like what? What's the key difference?
The brain. Alcmaeon's whole system is encephalocentric. Brain-centered, sensation, thought, it all happens in the brain.
Whereas the Pythagoreans were
Probably cardiocentric, heart-centered, like a lot of people back then. That's a fundamental split.
Huge difference. And Alcmaeon's method
Seems much more empirical. There's strong reason to think he actually did animal dissection.
Wow.
And his explanations for disease are purely naturalistic. That feels closer to the Ionian philosophers, maybe, than the more mathematical, kind of mystical focus of the Pythagoreans.
So that dedication, maybe it wasn't friendly.
Some scholars think exactly that. Maybe it was a challenge, a polemic, like, here's my system based on observation, what do you think?
So not a disciple then. Maybe an intellectual competitor, someone engaging with them, maybe borrowing structure, but putting his own empirical natural spin on it.
I think intellectual competitor nails it. He's taking ideas that are in the air, maybe Pythagorean ideas, but grounding them differently, making them scientific in a way.
Challenging the heart's role with the brain, challenging mystical knowledge with observation.
Exactly. It's like an intellectual showdown.
Okay, but how do we actually know all this? You called him a phantom of the archives. His book, On Nature, it's lost.
Completely lost. Everything we know is secondhand, filtered through other writers. That's the huge challenge.
So we're basically piecing him together from fragments.
Pretty much. We talk about two kinds of evidence. First, there are the B fragments. These are supposedly direct quotes.
Like his actual words.
Supposedly. But there are very few, maybe 5, that scholars generally accept. B1 is the start of his book about knowledge. B4 is the isonomia theory of health, precious stuff, but rare.
And the other kind?
The A fragments, or testimonia. These are paraphrases, summaries, criticisms from later authors. Plato, Aristotle, a later compiler named Aetius. Lots more of these.
But they come with the catch, right? The doxographical filter.
Exactly. You have to be so careful. These later writers had their own axis to grind, their own philosophical projects. They might rephrase Alcmaeon to fit their argument or even project later concepts back onto him. Anachronism is a big risk.
So we're not reading Alcmaeon pure. We might be reading Aristotle's Alcmaeon or Plato's Alcmaeon.
Precisely. A great example is his theory about the soul's immortality. Aristotle tells us Alcmaeon said the soul is immortal because it's always in motion, akin.
Okay. Simple enough.
But then Aetius, writing much later, says Alcmaeon's soul is self-moved, autokineton.
Self-moved. What's the difference?
It's a big difference philosophically. Self-motion is a very specific technical term from Plato. It's key to Plato's own proof of immortality.
Ah, so Aetius might have just updated Alcmaeon, used the familiar Platonic term.
That's the most likely explanation. It's much more probable that Aetius, living in a Platonic world, used the term he knew, rather than Aristotle somehow missing this really important Platonic idea in Alcmaeon.
It really shows how careful you have to be.
Yeah.
Like intellectual archaeology.
Yeah.
Trying to find the original layer.
That's a perfect analogy.
Yeah. Okay, so bearing those challenges in mind, let's get to the core of his ideas.
Yeah.
Starting with how we know things, that fragment B1 you mentioned, this start of his book.
Yes, it's considered just fundamental for Western thought. It goes something like, concerning things that are not perceptible, the gods have saphonia clarity, but insofar as it is possible for human beings to judge by signs, tekmeristai.
Wow. Okay, unpack that. Gods have clarity, humans judge by signs. What's he saying there?
He's drawing a massive line. Divine knowledge is direct, certain, clear. Human knowledge isn't like that. For us, it's indirect. We have to look at the evidence, the signs we can perceive, and then make inferences, judgments, conjectures based on those signs.
So no divine revelation for humans. We have to figure it out ourselves from evidence.
Exactly. It's this incredible statement of intellectual modesty, but also methodological rigor. Forget prophecy or mystical insight. The way forward for human understanding is observation and reason.
And when he says unseen things, given his interests, he probably means things inside the body, like organs, diseases.
Yeah, it seems very likely, yes. The inner workings. You can't see them directly, but a doctor, a philosopher, can observe the external symptoms, the signs, and use reason, tekmeristai, to figure out what's going on inside.
You know, it really sounds like the beginnings of the scientific method.
It really does. You've got the core pillars right there in that one-sentence fragment. Acknowledge limitations, rely on empirical evidence, signs, and use reason to interpret that evidence. It's huge.
Okay, on to arguably his biggest idea. The brain.
Yeah.
The encephalon.
Yes. His identification of the brain as the physical center, the seat of all sensation and all thought, this was just Revolutionary.
Because everyone else thought.
The heart, mostly. The prevailing view was cardiocentrism. Alcmaeon, as far as we know, was the very first person in the Western tradition to argue, no, it's the brain.
And he didn't just say it's the brain. He had ideas about how it worked, right? Different levels of thinking.
He did. He made this really crucial distinction between sense perception aesthesis, which he thought all animals have.
Seeing, hearing, smelling.
Right. And then understanding or intelligence sunesis, which he believed was unique to humans. A higher level cognitive function happening in the brain.
So a hierarchy. Perception first, then understanding, all coordinated by the brain. How did he think the senses got to the brain?
Through channels or passages. He called them poroi.
Poroi.
Yeah. He theorized that each sense, organ, eyes, ears, nose, was physically connected to the brain by these poroi. A stimulus travels along the passage, hits the brain, and that's when sensation happens.
Like little wires?
Sort of, yeah. And he even reasoned that if the brain got disturbed, maybe you got hit on the head, it could block these passages and mess up your senses. It's a remarkably mechanistic explanation for the time.
And the evidence suggests he wasn't just sitting and thinking about this. He might have actually looked. Dissection.
The evidence is strong, yes. Animal dissection. Maybe even excising an eyeball to trace those poroi, what we'd call the optic nerves, back to the brain.
Wow. In 5th century BCE Greece, that takes some serious scientific curiosity. Maybe nerve, even.
Absolutely. It's a monumental step for empirical research. It's a total paradigm shift. He's moving the whole question away from just metaphysics, like what is the soul, towards functional biology. How does this thing, the mind, actually work?
Locating it physically, connecting it to sensors, different levels of operation.
He's basically inventing a new field of inquiry, a rational biological framework for studying the mind, for the first time.
Okay, let's circle back to his theory of health and disease. The isonomia idea.
Right, that balance of powers. We have a key bit from Aeschylus summarizing it. What preserves health is the isonomia, equal rule, of the powers. Moist, dry, cold, hot, bitter, sweet, and all the rest. But the monarchia, sole rule supremacy, of any one of them produces disease.
So health isn't just the absence of disease, it's this active, dynamic balance.
Precisely. And no single power is inherently bad. Too much sweetness is bad, but so is too much bitterness. It's all about the equilibrium.
And crucially, disease comes from inside, from this balance being disrupted, not from, like, angry gods.
Exactly. It's a thoroughly naturalistic explanation. He totally rejected supernatural causes. Disease came from internal factors, problems with food, blood, marrow, even the brain itself, or external environmental factors, bad water, soil, exhaustion, injuries. Gods just weren't part of the equation.
The power of this idea, linking it back to that political model of isonomia and monarchia, it gave him this coherent way to think about the body as a self-regulating system.
That's exactly what it is. It's the direct intellectual ancestor of our modern concept of homeostasis, the idea that the body maintains internal stability. He grasped that fundamental principle thousands of years ago.
He really deserves the title Father of Physiology then, doesn't he?
I think he absolutely does, yes.
Now, he also apparently had an argument for the soul's immortality, but again, in his style, not based on religion.
That's right. It seems to be the first recorded philosophical argument for immortality in the Greek world, and it's based on observing nature, specifically the cosmos.
How did that work?
According to Aristotle and Diogenes, Alcmaeon argued the soul is immortal because it's like the heavens, the sun, moon, stars. What do they have in common?
Like they keep going. They move constantly.
Exactly. They are always in motion, akin. He saw the stars in their continuous circular paths, and he saw a similar constant activity in the soul, thoughts, sensations, always flowing. So if they both share perpetual motion, the soul must share the immortality of the heavens.
That's a really interesting analogy. And it helps explain that cryptic phrase attributed to him, men die because they cannot join the beginning to the end. What does that mean?
It probably contrasts our finite linear lifespan with the eternal circular movement of the divine immortal things, including the soul. We travel a straight line, birth to death. Immortal things complete the circle, returning to the beginning. Death is failing to complete that circle, stopping the motion.
And again, no mention of reincarnation or purification or anything overtly religious.
Nothing Pythagorean like that. No, it's purely philosophical, based on observation and analogy, a secular argument for immortality, which is pretty radical in itself.
And this connects back to that akin versus autocanon debate, the always moving versus self-moving. It sounds like his original idea was simpler, based on observation.
Very likely, yes. The simpler, always in motion, fits his analogical style. The more complex self-moved is almost certainly Plato's later development, which got read back onto Alcmaeon by writers like Aetius.
But even the simpler version, grounding immortality in natural philosophy rather than myth, that's a big step.
A huge step. Yeah.
Okay, let's put him in conversation with others. Empedocles, another major figure around the same time in Sicily, also interested in physiology, perception.
Yeah.
How do they differ?
Oh, they differed quite dramatically on some key points. They represent two really distinct paths in early Greek science.
Biggest difference first, brain versus heart.
Right. Alcmaeon, brain, encephalocentrism. Empedocles, heart, cardiocentrism. But not just the heart muscle, specifically the blood around the heart was the seat of thought for Empedocles.
Okay, and how did that affect their ideas about how we perceive things?
It seems tied to a deeper disagreement. Empedocles had his famous, nose-like theory. Everything gives off these tiny copies, effluences, and they fit into corresponding pores in our sense organs. We see fire because fire effluences enter fire pores in our eyes.
Right, I remember that. What was Alcmaeon's idea?
It seems to have been the opposite. Perception happens through the action of unlikes. Sensation is when a sense organ is changed, altered, by something different from itself, and then the brain interprets that change.
So fundamentally different mechanisms. And what about thinking versus sensing?
Another key split. Alcmaeon made that sharp distinction. Eisesis, sensation common to animals, versus synesis, understanding unique to humans. Empedocles seems to have blurred that line or even collapsed it. For him, thinking was basically the same kind of process as perceiving. It happened in the blood around the heart.
So comparing them really highlights how scientific Alcmaeon's approach was becoming. Focused on the brain, distinguishing functions, possibly using dissection.
Exactly. Empedocles is brilliant, a poet-philosopher, but Alcmaeon seems to be pushing towards a more recognizably biological empirical framework.
Now, let's talk about Plato. How much did Alcmaeon influence him?
Profoundly. You can't really understand Plato's psychology or even parts of his cosmology without seeing Alcmaeon's ideas as the foundation he was building on. Plato looked for the best science of his day, and Alcmaeon's models were cutting edge.
Where do we see that most clearly?
In the Phaedo, there's a passage where Socrates describes how we sense and think. He talks about the brain providing hearing, sight, smell, and then memory and opinion arising from those, and finally knowledge when opinion stabilizes. Scholars are pretty much unanimous. That's Plato summarizing Alcmaeon's doctrine.
So Plato just adopts the brain-centered model wholesale.
He does, and it becomes absolutely central to his later work, especially the Timaeus. That's where he lays out his big picture of the cosmos and the soul. He puts the immortal, rational part of the soul squarely in the brain, calling the head this perfect sphere designed to house the divine seed of reason.
And the rest of the soul.
The mortal, emotional parts he puts lower down in the chest and torso. But the whole structure, the hierarchy with reason in the brain on top, that architecture rests squarely on Alcmaeon's initial breakthrough.
And that soul's motion thing again. Plato uses self-moving, right? In the Phaedrus.
He does. And it's very likely he took Alcmaeon's simpler idea, always in motion, akineton, and developed it into his own more sophisticated concept of self-moving autokineton as the defining characteristic of soul. It's a classic case of building on, transforming a predecessor's idea.
So a huge influence on Plato. What about medicine? The Hippocratic school.
Here the connection is arguably even more direct, more practical. Alcmaeon has to be seen as the direct intellectual forerunner of Hippocratic medicine. Their core principles overlap incredibly closely.
Like what? What's the main connection?
The absolute commitment to natural explanations for disease. Just like Alcmaeon, the Hippocratic writers threw out the gods and demons. Illness has natural causes. Think of the treatise on the sacred disease.
About epilepsy.
Exactly. It argues passionately that epilepsy isn't sacred or demonic. It has a natural cause, and that cause is located in the brain. That's pure Alcmaeon philosophy put into medical practice.
And their theory of health.
Humors.
The famous four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, black bile. Health is the crassus, the right mixture or balance of these humors. Disease is dyscrasia, a bad mixture, and imbalance.
That sounds very familiar.
It's a direct elaboration of Alcmaeon's isonomia and monarchia. The fundamental idea of health as balance is identical. The The Hippocratics just specified which powers were the key ones, the four humors.
And they also followed him on the brain being central.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The author of On the Sacred Disease doesn't just blame the brain for epilepsy. They give this detailed account of the brain as the organ of consciousness, interpreting the senses, controlling the body. It echoes Alcmaeon remarkably. You really could imagine them having read his work.
It's almost like they took his theoretical framework and turned it into clinical practice. And even their method. Alcmaeon's epistemology, his tekmeristai, judging from signs. That's exactly what Hippocratic diagnosis is. Observe the symptoms, the signs, ask about the patient's history, consider the environment, and infer the hidden internal state, the imbalance.
So Hippocratic medicine really stands on Alcmaeon's shoulders.
In almost every fundamental way, yes.
Okay, then there's Aristotle. How did he view Alcmaeon?
It's a fascinating relationship, complex. Aristotle clearly held Alcmaeon in high regard, high enough to write a whole treatise arguing against him, against the doctrines of Alcmaeon. You only do that for major thinkers.
Even though the treatise is lost now.
Lost, sadly. But Aristotle is still one of our best, most reliable sources for Alcmaeon. He confirms Alcmaeon's use of opposites, his dualistic thinking.
And the soul's immortality.
Yes, it's Aristotle on the soul who preserves that core argument about always in motion, akin, importantly, without the later self-motion gloss.
And did Aristotle accept the sensation versus thought distinction?
He did. That distinction between eisegesis, sensation, and nous, or dianoia, thought understanding, with thought being unique to humans, that became a standard part of Aristotle's own psychology.
The big one, the brain. Aristotle didn't buy it.
He didn't, and this is the crucial point of divergence and maybe one of the great tragedies in the history of science. Despite Alcmaeon, despite Plato adopting it, Aristotle rejected encephalocentrism.
He went back to the heart.
He went back to the heart as the center of sensation and thought. He thought the brain's main job was just to cool the blood heated by the heart.
Wow. So Alcmaeon and Plato had it right, and Aristotle took a step back.
A major step back. And because Aristotle's authority became so immense throughout the Middle Ages and beyond, his view dominated. It arguably set back the progress of neuroscience for centuries.
So his engagement is this weird mix. Respect, careful reporting, but ultimately rejecting the most revolutionary scientific insight.
It's a real paradox. A crucial source, but also the source of a major wrong turn.
Okay, so summing him up. Who was Alcmaeon? Philosopher. Physician, scientist, doesn't matter.
Well, modern scholars debate it constantly. Diogenes called him a physician. Galen later called him a physiologos, a natural philosopher, maybe closer to scientist.
But maybe forcing him into our modern boxes is the problem.
I think that's exactly right. The question is kind of anachronistic. In the 5th century BCE, these lines weren't drawn so sharply. Medicine, natural philosophy, they were much more intertwined.
And his work reflects that, right? He goes from eyes to perception to knowledge, from politics to health, from the stars to the soul.
Precisely. It's a totally holistic approach. He crossed boundaries that didn't really exist for him yet. Someone called him a scientist across boundaries, and I think that captures it well.
Now, there's a really new idea about him, too. Something about poetry.
Yeah, this is quite radical. A scholar named Magaliane in 2019 put forward this thesis that Alcmaeon's book on nature wasn't written in prose, as everyone assumed.
But again?
In verse. Essentially, it was a poem.
Whoa. Okay, if that's true,
yeah,
what does that change?
It changes potentially everything about how we imagine his work functioned. If it's verse, it was almost certainly meant for oral performance, recitation.
So not just a dry text, but something heard, experienced.
Exactly. The rhythm, the sound, the musicality, they weren't just decoration. They were part of the argument, part of the persuasion. It makes it a public act, maybe even a political or aesthetic act, not just a scientific report.
Performing knowledge, maybe.
That's a great way to put it. Ané suggests this idea that the harmony and balance of the verse itself might have mirrored the isonomia he saw in the healthy body and the good state. Doing science was also about creating harmony in the community through performance.
That completely reframes him. Mind-blowing.
It's a very provocative idea, yeah. Challenges that modern split between science and art, reason and aesthetics.
Okay, so let's pull it together. His relevance today.
Yeah.
All those titles, father of physiology, founder of empirical psychology, father of medicine, father of neuroscience, are they justified? Especially in neuroscience.
I think they are, even if they're anachronistic labels. The justification for father of neuroscience is really strong.
Why, specifically?
Well, first, identifying the brain as the central organ. That's just a massive leap, like a Copernican or Darwinian shift in perspective. Second, distinguishing perception from understanding. Third, proposing those physical pathways, the poroi. And fourth, crucially, using animal dissection, that empirical method, to investigate it.
Hypothesis, framework, investigation.
It's the whole package. It defines a scientific research program into the brain and mind for the very first time in the West.
And his broader legacy, the isonomia leading towards homeostasis, the tekmerestai underpinning empirical science and rational medicine, the foundations he laid for Plato and Hippocrates.
It's immense. He really marks this pivotal moment where philosophy, natural philosophy, turns inward, from just looking at the cosmos to looking at the human being, body and mind, as objects of rational, naturalistic study.
He didn't just offer theories. He changed the whole way we could think about ourselves.
He absolutely did. He laid the foundations for entire disciplines.
So wrapping up, we've seen Alcmaeon, this phantom figure, was actually incredibly revolutionary.
Truly. Despite the fragments, you see someone moving past speculation, daring to look inside the body, using political ideas to understand biology, outlining a method for knowledge.
A method still basically used in science today.
Yeah.
And you, listening, have just unpacked some of the earliest intellectual DNA of Western medicine and neuroscience. You've seen how ideas born in this politically charged ancient city, Croton, still echo in concepts like homeostasis, and just our basic understanding that, yes, thinking happens in the brain.
It's quite a legacy. And here's the final thought to leave you with, picking up on that poetry idea.
Okay.
If Alcmaeon maybe used the harmony and rhythm of verse to convey the harmony and balance of his scientific ideas, does that challenge our modern assumption that science has to be purely factual, maybe even a bit dry? Could we gain something today by thinking more about how the form in which we present knowledge affects how it's received, how it resonates? Could other areas of life benefit from that kind of holistic, maybe even beautiful integration of form and content?